So I'm going to just do kind of a brief presentation to outline a little bit of what's in front of the board for this action and some of the work that's gone in the past, and explain a little bit, as well in terms of, what drives rates in San Diego County. So why are rates higher in San Diego County than when you go up to Riverside County? So just some background. So this sort of complex mosaic of colors is what water districts look like in Southern California. What you're seeing here is all the water districts that make up the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. So for most of Southern California, we're getting our water through the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. They are getting the majority of their water from two sources, the Colorado River and the Bay Delta. So by the time it gets to Metropolitan, they're paying for Colorado River infrastructure and state water project infrastructure. In most of Metropolitan service area, Metropolitan owns the infrastructure. So you're buying the water. Some agencies buy it directly from Metropolitan. So there's some cities, Glendale and others, that are Metropolitan member agencies that buy that water directly from Metropolitan. Others buy it through an intermediary. So in San Diego County, we don't buy the water from Metropolitan. We buy it from the San Diego County Water Authority, who buys it from Metropolitan. So that big sort of turquoise color in the bottom is the areas served by the San Diego County Water Authority. Now, what makes us unique is we're at the very top of that service area, right? So there's two things that make us unique. One's at the top, and one is we actually buy most of our water off Met's infrastructure, right? But because we're part of the San Diego County Water Authority, some of what we pay for is the infrastructure in San Diego County, right? That's the way the San Diego County Water Authority is set up. That's the member agency structure, is such that part of our rates go to fund the infrastructure in San Diego County. So it ends up being, and the northern districts challenged that rate back in the day and said, hey, what we're paying the same as OTI when we use certain facilities. Why is that the case? And the courts came back and said it's a legal rate, right? It's a uniform rate, it's legal. But it is a better deal the further south you are. So OTI gets a better deal than the agencies to the north. That's part of it, the agencies further south. So if we go to the next slide, this just shows a little bit of a detail. So what we're looking at is we can't, you may ask, well, why don't we buy our water directly from Met? As hard as this thing is, we're talking about to move to Eastern, you would multiply that by 10 to try to become a metropolitan member agency. So that idea is really not a viable idea. But what we are looking at that said, hey, wait a second, what if we just switched wholesalers, right? So what if we detach from the Water Authority and attach to Eastern? And I'll get into it in a little bit, but it's actually envisioned in the Act, right? So when we all joined the Water Authority back 75 years ago, Fallbrook was a founding member. When we signed on, there were rules for what you have to do when you leave, right? So it was in there, and that's, for us, we said, all right, let's look at those rules, and what I'm going to go through is basically our interpretation of how we read those rules and saying if we follow, this is what happens. So we're showing here is, Fallbrook and Rainbow passed a resolution last week to look at the same thing, is basically take ourselves out of the San Diego County Water Authority service area and move to Eastern's service area. For Fallbrook, this wouldn't cause any infrastructure changes. So there's not a single infrastructure project we would build to support this, right? So one day we would send a check to the San Diego County Water Authority, and after this went through, if it went through, we would send a smaller check to Eastern Municipal Water District. From an infrastructure perspective, there's nothing else we would need to do. We do have one connection off the Water Authority service area, but we've already stopped taking water off that connection. We don't need it. So you heard from Ms. Collins, who's representing the Water Authority, that, hey, the Water Authority's been asking for this one thing. And so it makes us sound like, hey, we seem unreasonable, right? Why can't we work this out? And I will note, I was involved for 10 years dealing with Camp Pendleton on the Santa Margarita conjunctive use project, dealing with DOD and DOM. That was tough negotiation, but we made progress, right? We were able to sort of make incremental progress. In the process we've had, it's been since about last November, we haven't made progress with the Water Authority. We haven't made progress in actually getting to the point where we're talking in details on terms. We did get some information in the letter from them today in terms of more specifics, but in the past, sort of the road we've traveled is we started with when we talked to them about it, then the first thing we got was a public records request from their attorney, which agency to agency is sort of an unusual way to deal with each other. Typically, we call and meet with each other before we do public records requests to each other. Then we had trouble getting a meeting set up, so we started meeting with member agencies to say, all right guys, let's explain why we're doing this, just so they had an understanding. We received a letter from the chair that basically said stop this public relations tour, so we said, all right, we'll wait until we meet with you. We met with them, so we had a couple meetings and we thought we were maybe making a little bit of progress at getting into the details. They did retain counsel, Ms. Collins, who's a very nice woman, for up to $1.2 million, which is a lot of money compared to what we spend on legal fees. So that kind of gave us a sign of where things were headed. And then we were, in our last meeting, we went down where we brought our finance manager to try to get into the details. But we were told, hey, no, you got to meet with each member agency individually to work something out. Well, the reason the Water Authority exists as an entity is that's really not a viable approach. The Water Authority could not exist, and all of us could vote on our boards for everything they did, but that's really not a viable way. So it's not a very viable solution to develop a solution to this by getting every individual board of every entity to agree to this different agreements, to the same agreement. So we are meeting with them. So we have met with 9 member agencies, and we've got a couple other meetings coming forward, but none of them have said, all right, here's what we see. We've laid out sort of our case for how we see detachment. None of them have been able to kind of constructively say, all right, here's how we see a path forward with each one of us. And then the last action that occurred at the Water Authority was the Water Authority said, hey, what we think is instead of the residents of Fallbrook deciding if they should leave, the whole 3.3 million people served by the Water Authority, which the biggest entity is the City of San Diego, the City of San Diego should tell us what we can and can't do. So, that sort of set a sign for us that this, negotiating something which we were open to figure out how to, leave, maybe doing a little more than what's strictly in the Act, didn't seem like a viable path forward. So that's, where we are today is, sort of back where we started in terms of trying to negotiate agreement. We're sort of back at the beginning. Now, the thing to note on the countywide vote, so as I said, in the Act, so in the County Water Authority Act, there is very specific language about detaching, right? And it says what you owe financially. And it also says it has to come to a vote of the FPUD ratepayers. So that the ratepayers ultimately would get to decide, is this a good deal for FPUD or not, right? Is this a good deal for us, right? And so that's really what we're laying out for you guys, is to understand some of the benefits and drawbacks. So the process, like we talked about, we've been through this discussion phase with the Water Authority, Eastern, and member agencies. In the recent letter that we've got from Ms. Collins, it talked about secret meetings. There has been no secret meeting. So as a public agency, before we brought this forward to the Water Authority, we did due diligence, right? So we did spent some time and said, does this make sense, right? It sounds a little bit crazy on the face of it. We've been a member for 75 years. Why hasn't this been done before, right? If it was possible, maybe someone would have looked at it. So we did spend some time looking at that before we approached the Water Authority, because it'd be sort of crazy to say, hey, here's something I'm thinking about, and then get an obvious response that it makes absolutely no sense and you didn't do any homework. So we did spend a little bit of time, but when we got to the point where we said, hey, we're really thinking this makes sense, that's when we approached the Water Authority and said, let's try to work something out. The step we're at right now is just the second step, which is submitting the LAFCO application. That does not preclude us from continuing to try to have discussions and figuring something out, right? So just because if the board elects to move this forward to the LAFCO process doesn't mean that stops all discussions. It also brings the LAFCO executive officer into the discussions. So, us as parties haven't made very much progress, but he may be able to help us, figure this out. So that would be the next step, is basically to say that's what we're going to bring forward here, is saying, do you want to approve moving the application to LAFCO? Even after that, there's still a long road here, so this isn't a simple process. So then it's got to get through LAFCO. There's LAFCO approvings and hearings, and LAFCO would have to move it to the next part of this. And then ultimately it would be an election, right? So no matter what, it was something that the people of Fallbrook get to vote on and say, you know, do we want to do this or do we not want to? So what's the main driver? So I think we've heard it, right? So I started here as interim general manager in our last rate case. And if people were here then, that was an incredibly painful time to be here as the interim general manager. It's a painful time for all these board members. So the easiest thing to do as a water district is not raise rates. We don't have to do anything, right? But if we did that, they wouldn't be doing their job because soon we'd run out of money and then you'd be really upset with us. So they have to sit up here and go, all right, I see the financial situation. What can we do, right? And all of us, they understand more than anyone because they get hit up every time they go to the grocery store or do anything. You know, rates are a big deal here, right? And more so than other areas of San Diego County. And that's really, you know, the message we've been trying to get out in this is that water costs really affect quality of life in Fallbrook. We get it, right? We all get that, right? Is that, you know, people move here because they want to have green landscaping. They don't want to live on a half acre of rocks, right? It matters. Water costs matter. And so the reliability cost equation in Fallbrook is different than if you're in the city of San Diego, right? There is a different equation in terms of what are you willing to pay, right? What is that crossover point? It's more because you use more water, right? And there's also challenges when you're a small rural district, right? There's more challenges because you don't get the economy of scale, right? We have infrastructure that was built 100 years ago that, you know, everyone owns a lot of infrastructure in Fallbrook. That's how it works, right? We're a big service area with a lot of infrastructure. Those are some of the challenges of Fallbrook faces that others don't. But the big difference here is cost of water. So it's about 60% of the, you know, the water operating budget is what we pay to buy water, right? And the big driver is there's a significant cost differential between buying it from the Water Authority and buying it from Eastern. Now, I'm not going to say there's not any benefits in buying water from the Water Authority, but what I'm going to suggest, and that's going to be ultimately up for, you know, the board and the people to decide, is that benefit worth the cost for the characteristics of Fallbrook? And there's really a couple things that show up in that cost. It's not Eastern's, you know, 50 times more efficient than the Water Authority, right? So it's not a differential that, you know, they're you know, all more efficient. The main difference is they don't have to pay for all the infrastructure in San Diego County, right? So they're buying just off Met's infrastructure and bringing it to us. And they've also, the Water Authority's invested in reliability, but some of those supplies are really expensive. Seawater desalinization is really expensive, right? It's reliable, but it's really expensive. You do not grow guavas on seawater desalinated water because it's super expensive. You can't grow avocados on seawater desalinated water because it would be super expensive. So although that, you know, that cost impact shows up in there, and it's maybe not the best, you know, source of supply for a Fallbrook, right? It may make sense for a city of San Diego if you've got biotech and other things, but for a Fallbrook, it probably doesn't make as much sense. So what we're looking at here is kind of going forward and what does this mean? So it's about a 20 to 30% decrease in the wholesale cost of water, and we're showing this just for sort of an ease of showing moving forward. If we do nothing, you know, we're on a current, we did a cost of service study. We went through and looked at what can we do with, you know, the cost of imported water, infrastructure needs, what does the future look like? And so the future looks like an 8% annual increase. That's what we're looking at, right? If we just kind of keep going forward the way we're going, we're 8% annual increase. Big drivers of that are declining water sales, obviously, because it's getting expensive, right? Infrastructure needs and imported water costs, right? So as those goes up, those drive our rates. Now, if we leave, right, at a minimum, we can keep the rates flat for 3 years, no increase, right? Now, there's also options in there the board could do. You know, what we're showing here is where the ending fund balance would be in the district. So for a long time, even with the rates we have, we've been spending more money than we're bringing in. So our fund balance year after year was dropping, right? Our expenses were higher than our revenues, right? So in this last year was probably the first year that we actually had higher revenues and expenses in a long time. What we're showing going forward is trying to at least build back up a little bit of reserves for any emergencies. And so that's options. If we do this, the board has options with rates, right? If we detach, they've got options to either keep them flat or potentially do some sort of decrease and increase. There's some options. If we stay as we go, they're increasing. It's just a matter of, is it 8%, is it 6%? You know, that's it. And that's the reality, right? Is that, you know, there are no easy answers in the current situation we're in to keep our rates down. You know, we can do things to make them a little less, but in terms of, you know, the level of increase in the current climate, there's nothing that gets us to the same level of being able to really do something more pronounced on rates. And so one of the big arguments has been, what is our impact to everyone else, all right? So if we leave, and Ms. Collins mentioned a number, $14 million, what that $14 million is basically, right now, we pay the water authority a certain amount of money, right? They have to pay Met a certain amount of money for the water they buy. The additional amount they're making off the water they sell us from Met is $14 million a year, right? So they're getting, that's us and Rainbow, they're getting $14 million a year, basically net from Fallbrook and Rainbow. So what we're looking at here is if you convert that to $1 per acre foot cost, so how many acre feet do we, do they get from us, Fallbrook and Rainbow, and what is that number? So that ends up being about $34 an acre foot. So the rate's, right now $1,700 an acre foot. Us leaving to everyone else means $34 an acre foot, about 1%, right? And the reality is that number actually ends up being somewhat lower because, if you're aware, in Fallbrook we're building a local water supply project. So our demands are going to drop on the water authority about 3,100 acre feet a year. So long term, that $14 million is actually a smaller number because we're going to be buying less water, and the demand numbers they use were a little high. So it's really somewhere around $28 an acre foot to everyone else. And so you look, what's that rate impact to everyone else? It's pretty small, right? When you're looking at the other people in San Diego County, the impact of us leaving is a pretty small impact. And if we go on top of that, the thing that is sitting out there is there's projects other people are planning to do that are out there in the county. So City of San Diego, you probably heard about the Pure Water Project, right? Where they're going to take wastewater treated to drinking water standards. Oceanside's looking at some water supply reliability projects. East County has a project to basically develop potable water supplies out of wastewater. Them rolling off the water authority has the exact same impact of us leaving, right? So when they roll off the water authority and stop buying more water from the water authority, those costs, right, those fixed costs of the water authority now get borne to those that are left, like Fallbrook. So if they raise a concern, hey, this $34 Fallbrook would cost, everyone else, those other projects add up to about $140 an acre foot. So when those projects come through, that's the impact you're going to see. The other thing that's even more for people in Fallbrook is we use more water, right? So someone that uses half an acre foot a year, right, that impacts less. If you have a big property and you use 4 acre feet a year or a bigger number, you're going to pay a much bigger impact. So disproportionately, the areas up in Fallbrook, Rainbow that use a lot of water bear those impacts. So one of the main items that's been raised is water supply reliability. And in the letter, it talks about a Met cutback from the 90s. So if you go back in the 90s, there was a really sort of dire water supply situation where there was going to be significant cutbacks on ag growers. Now, a lot of those had to do with ag programs that no longer exist at Metropolitan. What the water supply situation was like 40 years ago is vastly different today. So the same thing everyone here is talking about in Fallbrook, right, of water costs, and it's reduced my water demands. Water demands have gone down everywhere for the same reasons, right? So it's different levels of impact, but our water demands have gone down statewide. And at the same time, everyone's invested in water supplies. Met has invested a lot in water supplies, right? So there's been a lot of water supply investment. So that past of 40 years ago doesn't represent what that picture looks like today. So what we did is we had someone do sort of a conservative estimate of saying, all right, if we go from the Water Authority to Eastern, right, what are we sort of looking at, right, in a drought? What's going to be the impact, and is that a big impact for Fallbrook? And so we did a conservative estimate. It's based on the fact of saying, hey, Eastern said there's probably some things they could help mitigate it, but we said, all right, let's just look at it as if we're just passing it through Met's cutback. So the cutback they've had in the last drought was at 15%, which is kind of what they expect in a major drought issuance. So Met supplies would get cut back 15%. Because of our local supply project, we'd be about at 10%. If we stayed on the Water Authority, depending on where they are, it's between 3 to 8%. So the question is, and the question that would ultimately go to the ratepayers of Fallbrook, is that 3 to 8% versus 10% worth that 30% on the cost of water, right, for Fallbrook? Is that worth it? And what I would suggest is, because of the nature of our water use, especially it's largely outdoors, as soon as Med issues that conservation order, no matter what else is going on, it gets in the news. Everyone here, we reduce our water use, and we always get more than 10% reduction, right? So it's easier for us to reduce our water use here than it is for a lot of others, because it's largely outdoor use. That's most of the water use in Fallbrook is outdoor use. So we did propose terms. The Water Authority may not have liked the terms we proposed, but they were terms that we proposed. And what we proposed was essentially to follow the act, right? So there's a County Water Authority Act. It seemed to make sense to us that would be the rules we'd play by. And essentially, the way that act's written is they would continue. There are, within the property tax you pay to the county, some of that does go to the County Water Authority. So within your county, assessment, some water does go to the County Water Authority. Per the act, they would continue to collect that. We do a vote of our ratepayers and let them decide, do they want to stay with the Water Authority, or do they want to look at moving out. Some of these other more detailed issues about Med preferential rights and voting rights at Med, that was all detailed in a letter by Metropolitan to Eastern. And so the other thing that was brought up is this idea of a divorce, all right? So the thing to remember is, for 75 years, the Fallbrook residents have been funding infrastructure in San Diego County, right? So it's the idea of a divorce, except you lost all your assets and you're paying alimony, right? So in a divorce, you have stuff, right? The judge doesn't go, no, she gets all your stuff and you're paying her money, right? You actually look at what's the value of everything you have. And so basically what we're saying is, hey, look, we've paid for a lot of these investments in San Diego County. We just want to go. You keep them, right? You keep them, right? We've paid for stuff that benefits everyone else, right? We've helped funded the canal lining project. So we've been paying for a long time. They did a project that gets them fairly cheap water in San Diego County, right? They get that benefit. We funded all these projects in San Diego County to do emergency storage, right? So we've been paying for that. We don't have access to it yet, but we've been paying for it, right? So we're saying, hey, keep it, right? We paid for it. Just let us out. We'll follow the act. You get to keep those things and just let us out. So those are, which we thought is a fairly reasonable approach, right? This seems to make sense. And we don't think people in Fallbrook should continue to pay for assets they wouldn't be using, right? So the idea of, hey, you need to keep paying money to the Water Authority, but we're not going to provide you any service or any facility. So, and what was funded, there aren't facilities that were really just built for Fallbrook. So it's not we're leaving them out there. They built this pump station that just served Fallbrook, and then we are abandoning them. Everything we're paying for has a benefit to everyone who's left, right? So they're gaining the benefit of those things we've been a part of. So, in summary, what we're really focused on is, Fallbrook's unique in the county, right? And there's a couple of reasons for it. One is our location, because we're not connected. If we're at the bottom of the Water Authority system or near 78, it wouldn't make sense, right? We can't run a pipeline all the way up towards Mission Road to connect. That would not make any sense. But we're already connected to the metropolitan infrastructure, right? We already are in a position where we can say, hey, we don't need to do anything to not use any of the infrastructure in San Diego County. In that way, we more closely resemble other Eastern member agencies, right? right? So a lot of them are in a similar situation. They're connected to off-Med's infrastructure. They just need someone to help be the intermediary between them and Metropolitan. This idea that Metropolitan's wholly unreliable, there's a lot of, will be very similar to many agencies in LA County. Glendale, right, is about 70% Met, 30% local. That's essentially where we'd be. Beverly Hills is 100% off Met, right? So there's areas that are much more urban, right, have much higher water reliability needs that are going to be more dependent on that reliability. And so, you know, the main thing is for, you know, it's really the idea that we can do something different than what everyone's been seeing on rates, right? And we understand the need to do something maybe a little more drastic to deal with it, right? We hear you. You know, the group in here, we understand, represents a very large group out there. Everyone here knows that, right? We've been through this process, we get it. And so that's really what we're looking at is let's do something, you know, a little more, you know, bigger picture to try to deal with this. The LAFCO, as you might suspect, as the way the meeting goes, it's likely to be contested, right? So I think everyone got a letter from the Water Authority. So it's going to be a sort of contested, likely public discussion. And there are benefits to those that are left. So, like I said, the County Water Authority has built this project to provide emergency water in an earthquake or other emergencies. The benefit for us is with this project with Camp Pendleton, we'll have access to the Camp Pendleton aquifer, right? So it's not a real big deal for us because we're going to have water next door that's going to be more reliable. And the person who was in here said, hey, the other issue is right now we're wholly dependent on the reliability of the aqueduct, right? So when there was a break in the aqueduct, we were out, right? Well, in the future, we won't have that problem, right? So there's two parts of reliability, and I think we're missing one of the main ones is everyone's stuff is getting old. And you see that here in Fallbrook, right? We have people out of water every couple weeks for an unplanned pipe break, right? Where it's not some theoretical our pipes are getting old. They're old, you know, and we recognize that. So that reliability is just as important as the water supply reliability. So the benefit is, so they built this ESP pump station, this emergency storage project. They need to build the last part, right? We paid into it. If we stay in the Water Authority, they have to build that pump station to get us the water. We've been paying into it, right? So if we don't stay, they don't have to build it. And between us and Rainbow, that's about $40 million in cost they're going to avoid. That project, if we stay, it has to be built. Otherwise, they would need to refund us all the money we paid into the ESP project. And then there's a reliability benefit. So they no longer, they've invested in these higher reliability supplies for the desal project. So the other customers would get a higher proportion of that water, right? So there's a benefit to those that are left behind. So the action in front of the board, there's really you know, two options to consider in there. So one is to adopt the resolution of application for the reorganization to include detachment exclusion from the San Diego County Water Authority and annexation in Eastern Municipal Water District for submission to San Diego LAFCO, or at this point tell me not to adopt the you know, not to adopt the resolution of application. And it's typical work.